A millionaire dismissed his wife's career, thinking she was insignificant. What she revealed later left him speechless. The Grand Imperial Hotel was more than a building that night. It was a monument of power. Its massive marble entrance, flanked by gold-plated columns, ushered in men and women who thrived on success and indulgence. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with soft amber lighting, the kind that made jewels shimmer and secrets feel hidden under the polished veneer. The air hummed with the kind of laughter that only came from people who believed the world was theirs to control. Michael Harrington adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit as he stepped through the entrance. The faint smell of brandy and floral perfume wafted through the room, mingling with the hum of conversation. Michael's presence was magnetic as always. His 6-foot frame carried the weight of confidence, and his sharp jawline framed the smirk he wore like armor. Men shook his hand with a level of respect bordering on envy, and women glanced his way with intrigue. He thrived in places like this, where power was the currency, and charm was a weapon he wielded masterfully. Trailing behind him, Emily Harrington entered with far less fanfare. Her emerald green dress fit perfectly, modest yet elegant, its silk fabric swaying just enough to reveal her long legs. She wasn't the kind of woman who needed embellishments. Her natural beauty spoke for itself. Yet, despite her elegance, her role tonight was clear: to play the quiet wife. She knew the script by heart. As Michael greeted familiar faces and shared inside jokes with CEOs, Emily found herself fading into the background once again. She clutched a champagne flute as if it were a lifeline and scanned the room, observing how easily her husband worked the crowd. The same man who had once surprised her with thoughtful notes and late-night drives had become a stranger cloaked in expensive suits and arrogance. To him, she was just another piece of his image, a complement to his lifestyle, not an equal. Michael, Daniel Reed, a prominent investor, waved him over, grinning from ear to ear. "I heard Harrington Capital just scored another huge win. What's the secret to never losing, huh?" Michael chuckled, lifting his glass in a mock toast. "Simple. Know the game better than anyone else and don't play fair." The men around him laughed, and Emily's grip on her glass tightened. She knew Michael wasn't joking. Winning was everything to him, and tonight's gala was just another opportunity for him to prove it. Yet, for all his victories in business, he was blind to the cracks forming at home. Before Emily could slip away to the edges of the room, Michael turned, his hand brushing her elbow gently but deliberately. "Stay," he said with that polished smile of his. "I want you to meet someone." She blinked, unsure whether to feel surprised or suspicious. "Who?" "Vanessa Rossi," he replied, as if the name should mean something to her. And when Emily saw the woman approaching, she understood why. Vanessa was striking, model-like, with long black hair cascading over her shoulders and a red dress that clung to her like liquid silk. She walked with the kind of confidence that suggested she was used to being admired. Her smile was sweet but calculated, and as she extended her hand to Emily, there was something predatory in her eyes. "So lovely to finally meet you, Emily," Vanessa purred. Emily shook her hand, her expression unreadable. "Likewise." The moment was brief, but the tension between the three of them was palpable. Vanessa's gaze flicked between Emily and Michael, as if measuring their dynamic, searching for weaknesses. Michael, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately ignoring the discomfort, smiled and sipped his drink, launching into a story about a recent business trip to Dubai. "I hear you're working on a major marketing expansion," Vanessa said, shifting the conversation back to herself. Her fingers lightly grazed Michael's arm, and Emily noticed the subtle but unmistakable gesture. "Yes, Vanessa's been a tremendous help," Michael said, his tone warm. Too warm. Emily's stomach twisted, but she kept her posture steady. Years of public appearances with Michael had taught her how to suppress the storm raging inside. She had perfected the art of masking her emotions, but tonight, something felt different. The humiliation wasn't just a dull ache. It was a fire threatening to consume her. A waiter passed by, offering more champagne. Emily declined and set her glass down on a nearby table. The alcohol wasn't strong enough to numb what she was feeling. As Michael and Vanessa continued their conversation, She excused herself with a polite nod and made her way to the quieter side of the ballroom. She found refuge near the grand windows overlooking the city skyline. The view should have been comforting, but tonight, it felt suffocating. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, a woman trapped between who she was and who she had become. Once, she had dreams of her own, dreams she hadn't abandoned but had learned to keep hidden. Her mind raced as she recalled every slight, every moment Michael had dismissed her accomplishments in favor of his own. The way he had introduced her to colleagues as Emily, my wife, instead of Emily, the lead developer on one of the most successful software platforms of the year. Tonight wasn't the first time she'd felt invisible, but it would be the last. Behind her, she heard Michael's voice booming once again, followed by laughter that sounded rehearsed. The gala was his playground, but Emily had a plan of her own. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, quickly typing a message to her team. The subject line read, "Tomorrow's meeting. Finalize the presentation." Emily had spent the last year working in silence, building something that would redefine her career and, if she played her cards right, her future. She wasn't the same woman who had once waited for Michael's approval or validation. Her project was nearly ready to launch, and tonight's public humiliation had only solidified her resolve. Just then, Michael appeared by her side, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. "Why'd you disappear?" he asked, his tone laced with casual curiosity. "I needed some air," she replied, her gaze still fixed on the city. He followed her line of sight, then chuckled. "It's a beautiful view, isn't it? A city built on ambition." She turned to face him, her expression calm but unreadable. "Ambition isn't always about conquest, Michael. Sometimes, it's about building something meaningful." He smirked, as if amused by her sudden seriousness. "You sound like you're giving a TED Talk." Emily didn't respond. Instead, she held his gaze for a moment longer before turning back to the window. Let him think she was just being philosophical. He didn't need to know the truth yet, but soon enough, he would. The jazz band in the corner shifted to a slow, melodic tune, and couples began moving to the dance floor. Michael leaned closer, as if to suggest they join, but Emily gently stepped away. "I think I'll head home early," she said. "You stay and enjoy yourself." "Emily," his voice trailed off, but she didn't wait for him to finish. With a graceful nod to the room, she made her exit, leaving behind the noise, the lights, and the man who had underestimated her for far too long. Tonight was just the beginning. As Emily leaves the ballroom with thoughts of humiliation and resolve swirling in her mind, let me ask you something. If you were in her position, how would you have handled it? Would you confront Michael right there? Or would you play it smart like Emily and bide your time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more twists and turns ahead. The sound of heels against marble echoed faintly as Emily stepped into the foyer of their Manhattan penthouse. The lights from the city skyline filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting fragmented shadows across the modern decor. Marble countertops, leather couches, and glass tables that screamed success but felt cold. Everything about this place was curated to perfection, just like Michael's life. But perfection, Emily thought, could be its own prison. She kicked off her heels by the door and rubbed her aching feet, the weight of the evening still heavy on her chest. The corporate gala had ended an hour ago, and yet her mind replayed every moment like a looping nightmare. Vanessa's laugh, Michael's hand resting too long on her arm, the dismissive way he had ignored Emily's presence as though she were just another fixture in the room. Tonight had been a turning point, though not in the way Michael probably imagined. The soft click of the elevator doors opening jolted her from her thoughts. Michael entered the apartment, his footsteps steady as he placed his car keys on the console. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and the faint scent of whiskey lingered in the air. He didn't notice her at first, too focused on his phone as he scrolled through emails. When he finally looked up, their eyes met across the room. "You're home early," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. His tone was casual, as if they hadn't just spent the evening pretending to be the perfect couple in front of hundreds of people. "I needed some air," Emily replied, keeping her voice even. "I wasn't exactly enjoying myself." Michael chuckled, oblivious to the bite in her words. "Yeah, Those things can be a bit much. A bit much, she repeated, folding her arms across her chest. I wasn't aware that publicly parading your mistress was part of the usual corporate entertainment. His smile faded, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Don't start, Emily. Don't start. Her voice rose, but she quickly reined herself in. Losing control wouldn't help her cause. Do you have any idea how humiliating tonight was for me? Standing there while you flaunted Vanessa like she's some trophy? Michael sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that once would have made her want to comfort him. Now, it only reminded her of how distant they'd become. Vanessa isn't what you think she is, he said, his tone flat. Then what is she, Michael? Emily asked, stepping closer. Because from where I was standing, she seemed like exactly what I think she is. He exhaled sharply, as if debating whether to engage or walk away. But Emily wasn't finished. I've put up with a lot over the years. The long hours, the late-night meetings, the constant dismissals. But tonight? Tonight was a different level of disrespect. Look, he said, his tone shifting to something resembling diplomacy. Vanessa is involved in a lot of our marketing deals. That's it. Don't make this into something it isn't. Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it. Michael, you don't get to gaslight me. I'm not some naive wife who can't see what's right in front of her. His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he walked past her, heading toward the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the clink of the ice cubes filling the silence. Emily watched him, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and resolve. She had spent years tolerating his indifference, but something inside her had shifted. The Emily who once sought his approval no longer existed. You know what the saddest part is, she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. I don't even know why I'm still here. Michael paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He set it down slowly and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said, taking a step forward, that I've given you everything. My support, my time, my loyalty, and you've taken it for granted. His eyes narrowed slightly. Don't act like you're perfect in this marriage, Emily. She nodded, as if expecting the deflection. I'm not perfect, but at least I've been present. At least I haven't built our relationship on a foundation of lies. The tension between them was suffocating. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound coming from the distant hum of the city below. Finally, Michael broke the silence. You think walking away will solve everything? He asked, his voice lower now, almost vulnerable. You really think life's that simple? Emily tilted her head, studying him. There was something in his voice, a crack in the armor, but she wasn't sure if it was genuine or just another ploy to maintain control. I don't think it's simple, Michael. I think it's necessary. He approached her slowly, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. We've been through too much to throw it all away. Have we, though? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Or have we just been pretending for so long that we don't know how to stop? Michael didn't answer, and the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Emily turned away, walking toward the large window overlooking the glittering skyline. The view used to fill her with hope, but tonight it felt like a reminder of everything she had sacrificed. I don't want to keep doing this, she said finally. Living in a house full of expensive things, but feeling completely empty. You don't have to feel that way, Michael said, standing a few feet behind her. We can fix this. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the wave of emotions threatening to overtake her. When she turned to face him, her gaze was steady. I'm not the one who needs fixing. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once, he was at a loss. Emily exhaled slowly, the weight on her chest easing ever so slightly. I'm going to bed, she said, brushing past him. Good night, Michael. He didn't try to stop her. Instead, he stood there, alone, the sound of her footsteps fading as she disappeared down the hallway. For the first time in years, Michael Harrington felt something unfamiliar, powerlessness. Emily closed the bedroom door behind her and leaned against it, her breath shallow. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, the kind that comes when you realize you've reached a breaking point. She glanced at the framed photo on the nightstand, a picture from their honeymoon in Santorini, where they had laughed until their stomachs ached and danced barefoot on the beach under the stars. That version of them felt like a distant memory, a dream she had once believed in. But dreams change. She walked to her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating the dark room. With a few clicks, she opened her email and reviewed the details of tomorrow's meeting. Her team had made significant progress on the project, and if everything went according to plan, they would be ready to present their findings to investors by the end of the month. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed a message to her assistant. Double-check the investor presentation slides. I want everything airtight. As she hit send, a wave of determination washed over her. Tonight had been painful, but it had also been a reminder. She wasn't trapped. She had power, more than Michael could ever realize. And soon, he would find out exactly how much. Vanessa Rossi slid into the leather seat of the luxury car parked outside her penthouse, her long legs crossing elegantly as she adjusted the hem of her red silk dress. The smooth hum of the car's engine vibrated beneath her, and she leaned back, letting the feeling of power wash over her. It wasn't her car, of course. It belonged to Michael Harrington, but in many ways, Vanessa felt as though she owned more than just his luxury vehicles. She had him in the palm of her hand, or so she thought. Michael sat beside her, his phone lighting up intermittently as emails and notifications piled in. But for once, he wasn't glued to the screen. His gaze was on Vanessa, admiring the way her diamond earrings glinted under the dim glow of the city streetlights. The city moved around them, a blur of lights and motion, but inside the car, everything felt suspended, like they existed in a bubble where consequences didn't apply. Did you enjoy the gala? Michael asked, his voice smooth and confident. Vanessa smirked, running a finger along the collar of his suit jacket. I always enjoy being by your side. You make everything seem bigger. He chuckled, leaning in slightly as the car sped through the streets. To him, Vanessa was a temporary escape from the pressures of business and his crumbling marriage. She was excitement, wrapped in designer fabric and perfume, and for now, that was enough. You seemed a little distracted tonight, she added, her tone playful but probing. Michael's jaw tensed ever so slightly, but he recovered quickly. It's just work. Things are moving fast, and I have to stay ahead. Vanessa tilted her head, her dark hair cascading over her shoulder. Work, or Emily? He sighed, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. Emily's not the problem. Then why do you always look like you're running away from something when you're with me? Vanessa's question hung in the air, heavier than she intended. Michael didn't answer right away. He glanced out the window, watching the city blur past, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. Emily's words from earlier echoed in his mind. I'm not the one who needs fixing. She had cut through him like a blade, and no amount of whiskey or flirtation had dulled the sting. But he wasn't ready to confront that truth. Not here. Not with Vanessa. Let's not talk about Emily, he said finally, turning back to her with a forced smile. Tonight's about us. Vanessa leaned in closer, her lips brushing against his ear. Then let's make it unforgettable. The car pulled into the underground garage of a five-star hotel, and within moments, they were in the elevator, ascending toward the suite Michael had booked under a corporate alias. The walls of the elevator gleamed like polished gold, and the faint hum of classical music filled the air. Vanessa pressed herself against him, her perfume intoxicating, but as the elevator climbed higher, Michael's thoughts kept drifting elsewhere. Hours later, as Vanessa lay asleep beside him, tangled in silk sheets, Michael stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city lights. The glow that once symbolized ambition and success now felt hollow. He sipped the glass of scotch he'd poured after their rendezvous, but it didn't bring the comfort he was seeking. Instead, it sharpened the edges of his guilt. He had built his life on control, controlling deals, controlling relationships, controlling outcomes. But with Emily, that control was slipping, and it terrified him. She had always been the one constant, the person who grounded him when the chaos of business threatened to consume him. And now, he was losing her, bit by bit. Vanessa stirred in the bed behind him, her voice soft and sleepy. "Come back to bed." "I will," he said, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and when he picked it up, the name on the screen made his stomach tighten. Emily. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. It wasn't like her to call this late, and for a brief moment, he considered answering. But the weight of his guilt held him back, and he let the call go to voicemail. The glow of the phone dimmed, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. The next morning, Vanessa was up before him, her long robe tied loosely around her waist as she ordered room service. She moved through the suite with the ease of someone who had done this before, because she had. For months, their relationship had been carefully compartmentalized, existing only in the private spaces where no one could see. But Vanessa was growing tired of being a secret. She wanted more. Michael emerged from the bedroom, dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. He poured himself another cup of coffee, the bitterness waking him up faster than the caffeine. "You should spend the weekend with me," Vanessa said, sitting cross-legged on the couch. "We could go to the Hamptons. Get away from all the stress." "I can't," he replied without looking up. "You always say that." Her voice was light, but there was an edge to it. "Is it really work keeping you? Or are you still trying to salvage things with Emily?" He sighed, setting down his coffee. "Vanessa, you knew what this was when we started." She uncrossed her legs and stood, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. "Maybe I want more now." Michael tensed. He had always been good at managing situations, but Vanessa was slipping through the cracks of his control. "We agreed to keep this simple." "Simple?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sleeping in hotel rooms and pretending we don't know each other in public isn't simple, Michael. It's exhausting." He ran a hand down his face, the weight of everything crushing him. The walls of the carefully constructed life he had built were closing in, and he could feel it. Emily was pulling away, Vanessa was demanding more, and his business was facing challenges he hadn't anticipated. "I can't give you what you want," he said finally, his voice low. "Not right now." Vanessa's expression hardened. "Then what's the point, Michael? Because if I'm just another distraction for you, I'm done." She grabbed her purse and brushed past him, leaving the room with a forceful click of the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael sat down on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. He had spent years living like this, juggling business deals, mistresses, and a marriage he thought he could keep afloat through sheer will. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he could hold it all together. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't Emily or Vanessa. It was a message from his financial advisor, marked urgent. He opened it, scanning the contents with growing dread. A major client had pulled out of a deal, and stocks were dropping. His company was bleeding. Michael stood, pacing the room as his mind raced. The cracks were no longer hidden. They were visible, and they were widening. Vanessa might have been the least of his problems now. Emily, on the other hand, was a different story. He knew he needed to go home, to fix things before they spiraled beyond repair. But a part of him also knew that the damage might already be done. As he grabbed his suit jacket and left the hotel room, one thought echoed in his mind. Emily isn't the one slipping away, I am. In the dim glow of her home office, Emily sat in front of her dual monitors, the hum of the computer a soothing backdrop to the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled down the screen like a cascade of secrets waiting to be unlocked. The soft desk lamp illuminated stacks of documents, binders, and notebooks filled with meticulous plans. She leaned back for a moment, stretching her arms as her eyes flicked toward the clock on the wall. 2:34 a.m. Late nights like this had become the norm for her. While Michael had been busy with his mistress and lavish galas, Emily had been building something far more powerful in the shadows. For months, she had dedicated herself to this project, knowing that once it launched, everything would change. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she picked it up, squinting at the screen. It was a message from Ava, her closest colleague and confidant on the project. The beta testing went better than expected. Investors are on board for the demo. Emily smiled, typing a quick response. Perfect. Let's finalize the prototype for next week. She exhaled deeply, her breath fogging slightly against the cool night air. The weight of what she was about to accomplish was both exhilarating and terrifying. But this wasn't just about success. It was about freedom. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows, casting golden rays over the sleek furniture. Emily stood by the kitchen counter, sipping her coffee. Strong, black, no sugar. Her mind was already racing with tasks for the day ahead when she heard Michael's footsteps approaching. He entered the room wearing his usual uniform of a crisp white shirt and tailored slacks, but there was something different about him. His shoulders were tense, and the usual confident swagger seemed muted. "Morning," he said, grabbing a glass of water and leaning against the counter opposite her. "Morning," Emily replied, her tone neutral. For a moment, silence filled the space, punctuated only by the sound of the city waking up beyond the windows. Michael looked like he wanted to say something, but he hesitated, as if testing the waters. I noticed you were up late again," he finally said. "Work keeping you busy?" Emily took another sip of her coffee, her gaze steady. "Yes, we're on the verge of something big." Michael raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "What kind of project is it, exactly?" She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. Something meaningful. He leaned forward slightly, setting his glass down. "I've been hearing rumors. People in finance circles are talking about a new software platform that's causing a stir. It wouldn't have anything to do with you, would it?" Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she set her coffee cup down gently and crossed her arms. "Why would you assume that?" "Because," he said, his gaze narrowing, "you're smart. Smarter than most people give you credit for." The words were unexpected, and for a brief moment, Emily saw a glimpse of the man she had fallen in love with years ago. The man who had admired her ambition and brilliance. But that man had been buried under years of arrogance and neglect, and she wasn't ready to let her guard down just yet. "I guess you'll have to wait and see," she said, turning away and walking toward her office. Michael watched her leave, a knot forming in his stomach. There was something about her tone that unsettled him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the outside looking in, and it bothered him more than he cared to admit. By midday, Emily was back in her office, reviewing investor presentations when Ava called her. "We have confirmation," Ava said, her voice brimming with excitement. "3 major firms want to see the demo next week, including one of the top venture capitalists in the city." "That's incredible," Emily said, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Let's make sure everything is flawless." "It will be," Ava assured her. "And Emily, I just want to say, you've built something extraordinary. When this goes public, it's going to change everything." Emily's smile faltered for a brief second. "That's the plan." As she hung up, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her thoughts drifting back to Michael. He had no idea how much groundwork she had laid, or how close she was to unveiling the project that would disrupt the industry he dominated. She had kept it a secret, not just because she wanted to surprise him, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she didn't need his approval. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her identity. That evening, Emily met with her development team at a co-working space downtown. The room was buzzing with energy, the walls covered in whiteboards filled with diagrams, flowcharts, and sticky notes. Developers huddled around laptops, discussing final tweaks to the interface. "Let's run through the presentation one more time," Emily said, addressing the room. Her team gathered around a large conference table, their eyes focused as she walked them through the key points. "Our platform isn't just another data tool," she explained. "It's a complete ecosystem that allows firms to analyze, predict, and mitigate financial risks in real time." One of the developers, a young man with glasses and a determined expression, raised his hand. "Do you think the launch will attract immediate attention from the big players?" Emily nodded. "It already has. That's why we need to be prepared for pushback. Once they realize how disruptive this is, they'll try to fight us." Ava chimed in, her tone confident. "Let them. By the time they figure out what's happening, we'll be too far ahead." The room erupted in quiet laughter, but Emily's expression remained serious. She knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just a business venture. It was her way of stepping out of Michael's shadow and proving that she could succeed on her own terms. As the meeting wrapped up, Emily gathered her things and headed toward the elevator. The cool night air hit her as she stepped outside, and she took a deep breath, savoring the sense of purpose that filled her. For years, she had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. But soon, that narrative would change. When she arrived home, the penthouse was quiet. Michael was seated in the living room, scrolling through his tablet, but he looked up when she entered. "Long day?" he asked, his tone less confrontational than usual. "Productive," she replied, slipping off her coat and hanging it by the door. He hesitated, then set his tablet down. "Emily, can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "About what?"
Us.
The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. For a moment, she considered sitting down, hearing him out, but she wasn't ready. "Not yet. I'm tired," she said softly. "Maybe tomorrow." Michael's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded, accepting her response. As she walked past him toward the bedroom, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. She knew he wanted to fix things, but she also knew that the power dynamic had shifted. He wasn't in control anymore. She was, and in a few short weeks, he would realize just how much. She closed the bedroom door behind her and leaned against it, her breath steady but her mind racing. The revolution had already begun, and there was no turning back. Michael Harrington's morning routine had always been a tightly orchestrated performance, from the alarm clock that chimed at precisely 6 a.m. to the way his coffee was brewed, strong, with a splash of oat milk. Today, however, everything felt slightly off. As he stood in the kitchen, staring out at the skyline with the sun rising over the horizon, the city seemed quieter, like it was holding its breath. He sipped his coffee, the bitter taste doing little to shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The night before had been restless, his dreams a jumbled mess of half-formed thoughts, Vanessa's laughter, and Emily's cold, measured responses playing like a soundtrack in the background. The cracks in his carefully constructed world were growing, and for the first time, Michael wasn't sure how to stop them. "Morning," Emily said as she entered the kitchen. Her tone was casual, but there was a guardedness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wore a light gray blazer over a fitted blouse, her hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. She looked professional, polished, and completely out of reach. Michael swallowed the knot in his throat. "Morning. Big day ahead?" Emily nodded, grabbing her own mug and pouring herself some coffee. "Meeting with potential investors," she said, not offering any additional details. Michael watched her carefully. It wasn't unusual for Emily to be busy, but the way she had been moving lately, calm, calculated, and always one step ahead, made him uneasy. There was a new confidence about her, one that felt impenetrable. "I was thinking we could have dinner tonight," he suggested, his voice softer than usual. She paused, her fingers wrapping around the mug. For a brief moment, he thought she might say yes, but then she shook her head. "I don't think I'll be home early enough. Maybe another time." Michael tried to mask his disappointment with a nod. "Sure, another time." But he knew that another time was an excuse, a polite dismissal. As she grabbed her bag and left the apartment, Michael stood there, alone, the silence in the room pressing against him like a weight. Something had changed between them, and no matter how hard he tried to pretend otherwise, he couldn't ignore it. At the office, things weren't much better. Michael sat in the boardroom, flipping through reports while his team presented updates on recent projects. Normally, he thrived in meetings like this, controlling the flow of discussion and making decisions with authority. But today, his focus wavered. "Mr. Harrington?" One of his analysts, a young man with an eager expression, interrupted his thoughts. "Do you want to review the projections for Q3? Michael blinked, realizing he had zoned out. "Yes, of course," he said, clearing his throat. "Continue." The analyst launched into a detailed breakdown of the company's expected revenue, but Michael barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere, on Emily, on Vanessa, on the mounting sense that his empire was slipping through his fingers. The company had always been his sanctuary, the one place where he felt invincible. But even here, cracks were starting to form. After the meeting, he returned to his office and shut the door, leaning against it for a moment before collapsing into his chair. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the feeling of impending doom. His phone vibrated on the desk, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Vanessa. "We need to talk." Michael exhaled sharply and tossed the phone aside. He couldn't deal with her right now. Not when his marriage was teetering on the edge and his business wasn't as secure as he had once believed. The walls around him were closing in, and he was running out of room to maneuver. Meanwhile, across town, Emily was in the middle of her investor pitch. The room was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The table was lined with executives and venture capitalists, their expressions ranging from curious to impressed as Emily presented the details of her software platform. "This isn't just a tool for analyzing financial data," she said, her voice steady and confident. "It's a predictive system that identifies risks before they become liabilities. With real-time updates and AI-driven recommendations, companies can make faster, more informed decisions." One of the investors, a gray-haired man with a sharp gaze, leaned forward. "And you're confident this can outperform the systems currently dominating the market?" Emily met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not just confident. We've already proven it during beta testing. The results speak for themselves." Ava, seated next to her, passed out printed reports detailing the beta results. The room fell silent as the investors flipped through the pages, nodding occasionally as they absorbed the data. Emily felt a surge of pride. This was her moment, the culmination of months of late nights and meticulous planning. But she didn't let her excitement show. She had learned the art of keeping her emotions in check, a skill that had become second nature during her marriage to Michael. When the presentation ended, several investors approached her, asking follow-up questions and expressing interest in scheduling further discussions. Ava gave her a subtle thumbs up as they exited the room, and Emily finally allowed herself a small smile. "We did it," Ava said as they stepped into the elevator. "Not yet," Emily replied, her smile fading. "But we're close." Back at the penthouse, Michael sat on the couch, nursing a glass of scotch as the evening light faded into twilight. The city outside was alive with movement, but inside, the silence was suffocating. His phone buzzed again, and this time, he picked it up. Vanessa's message was short but cutting. "You can't ignore me forever, Michael." He set the phone down without responding. Vanessa had been a distraction, but now she felt like a liability. What had once been thrilling now felt dangerous, and he couldn't afford any more risks. But as much as he wanted to focus on fixing things with Emily, he wasn't sure where to start. The front door opened, and Emily walked in, her footsteps light but purposeful. She placed her bag on the counter and glanced at him, her expression neutral. "Long day?" Michael asked, hoping to spark a conversation. "Productive," she replied, echoing the same response she had given that morning. He stood, unsure of how to bridge the gap between them. "Emily, can we talk?" She paused, her hand resting on the back of a chair. "About what?" "Us." The word hung between them, weighted with years of unresolved tension. Emily sighed and shook her head. "Not tonight, Michael. I'm exhausted." He watched her disappear into the bedroom, the door closing softly behind her. The rejection stung, but what hurt more was the realization that he no longer had the power to fix things with a simple conversation. Emily was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop her. As he sat back down, the scotch in his glass untouched, he felt the full weight of his mistakes. The fortress he had built, the life of success, wealth, and control, was crumbling, and for the first time, he understood what true vulnerability felt like. The cracks were no longer just in his marriage or his business. They were within him. The air inside Harrington Capital's sleek, glass-walled headquarters felt different that morning. The usual buzz of energy, phones ringing, analysts scrambling, and deals being discussed, was replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the muffled clicks of keyboards and the occasional whispered conversation. The staff avoided eye contact with one another, as if acknowledging the situation aloud would make it worse. Something was happening, and everyone knew it. Michael sat in the center of the storm, his office a glass enclosure overlooking the floor below. Normally, the view gave him a sense of power, but today it felt like a front-row seat to disaster. Reports were scattered across his desk, graphs and projections blaring in red. each one more damning than the last. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and his sleeves were rolled up, a rare sign that the usually polished Michael Harrington was unraveling. "Mr. Harrington," his assistant said softly, peeking her head through the door. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting in the conference room." Michael nodded, waving her away without looking up. His mind raced as he tried to process the numbers. The stock price had taken a sudden plunge overnight, triggered by the loss of a major client who had shifted their business to a competitor. Normally, Michael could weather such storms. But this time, the damage ran deeper. His competitors weren't just stealing clients. They were using a new software platform that was outperforming his firm's tools at every level. He didn't need to ask which platform it was. He already knew. Emily. The realization was a punch to the gut. For months, he had dismissed her late nights and quiet focus as harmless distractions. He had underestimated her, just like he had underestimated the cracks in his marriage. Now, those cracks had grown into fissures that threatened to swallow him whole. An hour later, Michael sat at the head of the long conference table, facing a room filled with board members and senior executives. Their expressions ranged from concern to accusatory, and he could feel the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on him. "Let's get straight to the point," one of the board members said, his tone sharp. "We've lost 3 major clients in the past week, and our stock price is in free fall. What's your plan to stop the bleeding?" Michael clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to lash out. He was used to being the most powerful man in the room, but today, he felt like a boxer backed into a corner. "We're working on renegotiating contracts with several key partners," he said, keeping his voice calm. "And I've instructed our development team to fast-track the rollout of our new data analytics tool." The board member wasn't convinced. "With all due respect, that's not enough. We've fallen behind because of this new software that's sweeping the market. If we don't address that directly, we're done." Michael's chest tightened. He knew the board was right, but admitting that meant acknowledging just how far things had spiraled out of his control. "We're aware of the threat," he said carefully, "and I assure you, we're taking steps to mitigate it." The board exchanged skeptical glances. Michael could feel their doubts suffocating him, but he forced himself to maintain his composure. He had built his career on being unshakable, and he wasn't about to let them see him break. After the meeting, he returned to his office and shut the door, leaning against it as he exhaled shakily. His phone buzzed on his desk, and he walked over, expecting another crisis email. But the notification wasn't work-related. It was a news alert. Disruptive tech startup secures major funding to expand its reach. The headline was accompanied by a photo of Emily standing confidently in front of a podium, addressing a room full of investors. She looked radiant, her posture exuding strength and self-assurance. Michael stared at the image, a mix of pride and dread swirling in his chest. He had always known she was talented, but seeing her dominate the business world on her own terms was something he hadn't anticipated. And the fact that her success was directly tied to his downfall made it almost unbearable. The knock on his door jolted him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice strained. It was his financial advisor, a balding man with a perpetual look of worry. "We have another problem," the advisor said, handing Michael a folder. "One of our lenders is pulling their line of credit. They're concerned about our liquidity." Michael's head throbbed as he skimmed the contents of the folder. His empire was crumbling, piece by piece, and the cracks he had ignored were now wide open for everyone to see. That evening, as Michael drove home through the city, the weight of the day pressed down on him like a boulder. He had spent years building a fortress around himself, an empire that no one could touch. But now, that fortress was collapsing, and the person responsible was the woman he had taken for granted. When he arrived at the penthouse, the lights were dim, and the faint smell of lavender drifted through the air. Emily was sitting on the couch, her laptop open on the coffee table, her fingers typing effortlessly across the keys. She didn't look up when he entered. "Busy?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. She finished typing her sentence before closing the laptop and meeting his gaze. "Always," Michael hesitated, standing awkwardly by the door as if he were a guest in his own home. "Emily, we need to talk." She arched an eyebrow, leaning back against the cushions. About what you're doing." About the fact that your project is directly competing with my company. Emily's expression didn't waver. It's not personal, Michael. It's business. Don't give me that, he snapped, the frustration boiling over. You knew exactly what you were doing. You waited until the perfect moment to strike. Her gaze hardened, but her tone remained calm. I didn't create this to hurt you. I created it because it needed to exist. The fact that it's threatening your company is a consequence of your own complacency, not my ambition. Michael felt the sting of her words like a slap to the face. So, that's it? You're just going to watch me fall apart and do nothing? Emily stood, her presence commanding even without raising her voice. I'm not responsible for fixing you, Michael. You built your empire on control and dominance, and now that it's slipping away, you're looking for someone to blame. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. Deep down, he knew she was right. I didn't want it to be like this, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. And neither did I, she replied, her tone softening. But you made choices, and so did I. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken regret and the echoes of what could have been. Michael watched as Emily gathered her laptop and walked toward the bedroom, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit living room. For the first time, Michael felt the full weight of what he had lost, not just in business, but in his marriage, in himself. The cracks in the fortress weren't just structural. They were personal, and they were irreparable. As he sat on the couch, the city lights casting shadows on the walls, one thought consumed him. He wasn't sure if he could rebuild from this. The evening air was cool, a light breeze rustling the curtains of the open balcony doors as the city lights twinkled like scattered stars. Inside the penthouse, the silence was suffocating, the kind that wasn't peaceful but pregnant with unresolved tension. Michael Harrington sat on the edge of the couch, elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed as if in prayer. His phone lay face down on the coffee table, ignored for the first time in years. Tonight, the notifications and emails meant nothing. He couldn't shake the image of Emily's face from earlier that day, calm, collected, and completely unbothered by the chaos she had unleashed. How had he missed it for so long? How had he ignored the brilliance that had been sitting across the dinner table from him all these years? His company was bleeding, his reputation was under fire, and the woman responsible was upstairs in their bedroom, perfectly poised and untouched by the storm she had set in motion. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Emily descended the staircase, her presence filling the room even though she moved quietly. She wore a soft cardigan over a simple blouse, her hair loosely tied back. She didn't look like someone who had just orchestrated the downfall of one of the largest firms on Wall Street. But that was the brilliance of Emily. She didn't need to look the part to be the most powerful person in the room. Michael stood as she entered, his throat tightening. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but lacking the edge it usually carried. Emily didn't hesitate. "Then talk." He motioned toward the couch, but she remained standing, crossing her arms as if bracing herself for whatever was about to come. Michael hesitated for a moment before sitting back down. The weight of everything he wanted to say pressed against his chest, but the words refused to come out in an organized fashion. "How long have you been planning this?" he finally asked. Emily tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me," he replied, his voice cracking slightly. "You could have come to me, Emily. You didn't have to go behind my back." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Come to you? And say what, Michael? That I had an idea you wouldn't take seriously? That I wanted to build something on my own, without being overshadowed by your condescension?" His stomach churned at her words. He had spent so much time dismissing her ambition as a hobby, assuming she was content playing the supportive wife while he took center stage. But the truth was staring him in the face now, undeniable and unforgiving. "I didn't mean to," he started, but she cut him off. "Yes, you did," she said softly but with conviction. "You didn't see me because you didn't want to. You liked the version of me that stayed quiet, that didn't challenge your ego. But that's not who I am, Michael. And I'm done pretending." Her words hit him harder than he expected, each one slicing through the layers of denial he had built around himself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he tried to steady his breathing. "I know I messed up," he admitted. "I know I took you for granted. But I didn't think—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I didn't think you'd ever leave." Emily's eyes softened for the briefest moment before she blinked, returning to her composed demeanor. "I haven't left yet." Michael's head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Then don't. We can fix this." She took a step closer but didn't sit. "Fix what, Michael? The company? Our marriage? You think an apology is enough to erase years of being ignored, of being treated like I was part of the decor?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, he realized he didn't have the answers. The man who had built an empire on solving problems, on always being 2 steps ahead, was completely lost. Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm not here to destroy you, Michael. That was never the plan." "Then why does it feel like you have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're realizing that you built everything on a foundation that wasn't solid," she replied. "You relied on control, on dominance, but you never considered what would happen if the people you tried to control stopped playing by your rules." Her words settled over him like a heavy blanket, suffocating but truthful. He thought back to the board meetings, the frantic phone calls, the investors pulling out one by one. His world wasn't falling apart because of Emily. It was falling apart because he had assumed it was untouchable. "Do you even care what happens to the company?" he asked, looking up at her with desperation in his eyes. "I care," she said, surprising him, "but not for the reasons you think. I care because it's part of you, and despite everything, I don't want to see you lose everything. But that doesn't mean I'm going to save you." Michael felt his chest tighten. "Then what do you want from me?" Emily took a deep breath, as if she had been waiting for that question. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be underestimated, to have someone look at you and assume you're not capable of greatness. I want you to see the world from my perspective, Michael." He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to breathe. "I don't know how to do that." "Then figure it out," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "The way I had to figure out how to thrive without your support." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging between them. Michael's mind raced, replaying every moment of their marriage. Every time he had dismissed her ideas, every time he had brushed off her accomplishments. He had always assumed that she would be there, quietly supporting him, because that's what she had always done. But he had been wrong. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Not like this." Emily's gaze softened, but she didn't move closer. "Then don't make this about winning me back. Make it about becoming someone who deserves to have me in their life." Her words were a challenge, one that Michael wasn't sure he was ready to face. But he knew that if he didn't try, he would lose more than just his company. He would lose the only person who had ever truly seen him for who he was. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, his voice tentative. Emily hesitated for a moment before answering. "That's up to you." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving him alone in the dimly lit room. Michael sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been standing. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: regret, guilt, fear. But underneath it all, there was something else: hope. It was fragile, like the cracks in a glass window that hadn't yet shattered. But it was there, and for the first time in a long while, Michael felt like maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to rebuild what he had broken. But it wouldn't be easy, and he knew that if he failed, there would be no second chance. The early morning light crept through the curtains of the penthouse, casting a soft glow over the city below. It was quiet, almost peaceful, but inside Michael Harrington's mind, a storm still raged. He had spent the entire night on the couch, unable to sleep, his thoughts an endless loop of regret, plans, and memories. The weight of Emily's words from the night before lingered like an ache he couldn't shake. "Make it about becoming someone who deserves to have me in their life." The idea terrified him, not because he doubted her, but because for the first time, he doubted himself. Michael had always defined success by external achievements, mergers, contracts, and numbers on a balance sheet. But those things had failed him now. Emily had made it clear that this wasn't about winning her back with grand gestures. It was about change, real, painful, uncomfortable change. He stood and walked to the window, the skyline sprawling out before him, the same view that had once filled him with pride. Now, it felt like a reminder of everything he stood to lose. He watched as the city woke up, the streets below beginning to hum with life. Somewhere out there, Emily was preparing for another day of success, while he stood here trying to figure out how to rebuild the pieces of himself. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him and turned to see Emily entering the living room. She was dressed casually in jeans and a loose sweater, her hair falling softly around her shoulders. She looked at him briefly before heading toward the kitchen to make coffee. The silence between them wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It was the kind of silence that held potential, a chance for something new or a final goodbye. Michael watched her for a moment before finally speaking. "Emily." She paused, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. "Yes? I want to try," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Not just for you. For me. I need to be better." She turned around, leaning against the counter with her arms folded. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. "You've said that before." "I know," he admitted. "But this time, I'm not just saying it. I'm ready to prove it." Emily studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Then prove it." Over the next few weeks, Michael threw himself into the task of redefining his life, but not in the way he had originally planned. Instead of focusing on damage control at work or trying to win Emily back with lavish gestures, he started small, intentionally. He began attending therapy, something he had scoffed at in the past. At first, the sessions were uncomfortable. Talking about vulnerability, admitting to mistakes, those weren't things Michael had ever been good at. But as time passed, he began to uncover parts of himself he hadn't confronted in years. The pressure to always be perfect, the fear of failure, and the insecurity that had driven him to control everything around him. He didn't tell Emily about the therapy right away. He wanted her to see the change, not just hear about it. But she noticed the little things. He stopped checking his phone obsessively during dinner. He listened when she spoke, really listened, instead of thinking about what to say next. And, perhaps most importantly, he started to show genuine humility. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sun set over the city, Michael turned to her and said, "I've been seeing a therapist." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised but not dismissive. "Really?" He nodded. "It's been hard, but I think it's helping." She smiled faintly, the warmth in her expression reminding him of the early days of their relationship when conversations were easy and filled with possibility. "I'm glad," she said, her voice soft. It was a small moment, but for Michael, it was monumental. He had spent years trying to prove himself through grand achievements, but this, being vulnerable and honest, felt like his first real victory. At work, things weren't as forgiving. The fallout from the company's recent losses continued, and Michael had to face the reality that he couldn't fix everything. Instead of doubling down on risky strategies or trying to maintain control, he did something that shocked his board. He admitted his mistakes. During a company-wide meeting, he stood in front of his employees and acknowledged the missteps that had led to their current situation. "I take full responsibility," he said, his voice steady but sincere. "I let my ego cloud my judgment, and I didn't listen when I should have. But I'm listening now, and I'm committed to doing better. For all of you." The room was silent at first, but then, one by one, employees began to clap. It wasn't the thunderous applause he was used to, but it was genuine, and that was enough. For the first time, Michael felt like a leader, not just a boss. At home, Emily was also experiencing a transformation. Seeing Michael genuinely work on himself made her reconsider her own walls. She had spent so much time protecting herself from his indifference that she hadn't realized how deeply those walls were affecting her ability to trust again. But slowly, she began to let him in. One night, as they sat on the couch watching a documentary, Michael reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his, a silent acknowledgement that they were both trying. "Do you ever think about how we started?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael smiled faintly. "All the time." I miss that version of us, she admitted. Me too, he said, squeezing her hand gently. But maybe we can build something even better. Emily turned to look at him, and for the first time in months, she saw not the man who had hurt her, but the man who was fighting to change. Maybe we can. Weeks later, during one of their quiet evenings together, Emily surprised Michael with news that left him breathless. I've been thinking, she said, setting down her tea. Maybe it's time we take a trip. Just the two of us. He blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. A trip? She nodded. Somewhere quiet, away from everything. We could use the time to figure out where we go from here. Michael's heart raced. He knew this wasn't just a vacation. It was an opportunity, a second chance. I'd like that, he said softly. Emily smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they shared a moment of genuine hope. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but they were finally on it together. As they sat there, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Michael realized that this wasn't about returning to the past. It was about building a future where both of them could thrive, not just as individuals, but as partners. And for the first time, he felt like he had a chance to do just that.